It's funny, the last time I had an ascent onto the pulpit, I think I was about 10 years old in Castlebar, and I had to go up and talk, to give a message to the parish priest, who afterwards said to me, he said, sure, maybe you'll be soon coming up here and taking my place. In other words, but I have a vocation. Now, I ended up in Maynooth, all right, but it was in the history department. It wasn't in St. Patrick's, the seminary. First of all, I must thank Amanda altogether and her team. The organisation for this has just been phenomenal. Whenever a conference is successful, it is the people behind who do all the hard work and basically put it all together. And Amanda has definitely done this with this conference. We're in an era in which migration is a major issue, not just alone in Europe, but also North America and other places. But it must be remembered that migration is something that is from the time that man came on earth. And people migrate for economic reasons, also because of famine, wars, natural disasters, etc. And this is the case in relation to the 8 million people who emigrate from Ireland. Sorry, could we have the... Now, an estimated 8 million people left Ireland between 1815 and 1914. Now, I call it an estimate on account of the fact official figures don't start until 1851. And, sorry, can we have the next one? Yep, until 1851. And even between 1851 and 1876, the records are not very reliable, largely on account of the fact it was people who tended to be former military men, etc., who were not entirely up to the job. So it's only from about 1876 that our figures are totally reliable. But nevertheless, you get some sense here of the numbers who are actually leaving. And in the period 1815 to 1852, 1853, Canada was one of the main destinations that the immigrants went to. The next one, please. And there are a number of ways in which the immigrants actually leave. In the Irish case, about 80% their passage is paid for by friends and relations who have already immigrated. The numbers who actually pay for their own fares is quite small. But you have a cohort then who don't have the money and are dependent on others to help them out. And to an extent, I'm going to concentrate a bit in relation to the assisted immigration and putting the Peter Robinson scheme in the context of these assisted immigrants. How many were there? My estimates is that the numbers are anything between 150,000 and 200,000. You have the poor law. The bill mentioned there about the numbers in the workhouse. Here is a statistic for you. In 1850, 920,000 people entered the workhouse at some stage or other. Okay, some of them only for a very short period, less than 2 months. But quite a large number stayed, in particular women and children. Now, who were they? We know the group of about 4,000 that went to Australia, largely on account of the fact the Australian authorities have kept superb records. But there are over 15,000, mainly women and children, who were sent to Canada between 1849 and 1856. We know very, very little about them. There are two groups in particular. One is a group from the Montbellew in County Galway. And largely on account of the fact the poor law guardians took down the names of the 50 women that were being sent. And we have been able to find out a number of these. One of them A woman by the name of Jane Kenny was 40 when she was sent out. And she had been 7 years in the workhouse between Montbellew and Ballinasloe. In 1854, she appears in a lunatic asylum just outside of Toronto. She had exchanged one institution for another. Another group that we know a certain bit about is a group of 50 men and women that are sent from Cork workhouse to New Brunswick in 1850. The problem was, most of them had given trouble in the workhouse in Cork. They had been involved in rioting. They had been involved in attacking the staff. Some of them were blind, some of them were crippled, and a number of them, when they arrive in New Brunswick, are actually sent back. But the vast majority of the other immigrants that are sent out under the Poor Law, we know nothing about. Another group were those of the landlords, which have been, we know a reasonable amount from some of them. My own work on the Gore Booth estate in Sligo, Tyler and Bider's work on the Lansdowne estate in Kerry, and a number of others. We reckon there is anything between 50,000 and 100,000 that are assisted by landlords during the famine. The third group are philanthropists, and these include people like Vera Foster, who they encouraged young women to emigrate and paid their passage up to £2. And the reason he chose young women, they were more likely to send remittances back to their families than men. Another group which I've done quite a lot of work on is James Hack Tuke, who assisted nearly 10,000. About 1,850 go to Canada. And I'm nearly sure that the Mark Carney's connection with Canada was as a result of his grandparents going out to somebody who had been assisted by Tuke. But these are the three main groups, and the last group involves the Peter Robinson group by the British government. It is the only immigration scheme that the British government paid the full amount of money, was involved in the organisation. All of the others, the British government wanted very little to do with them. The decade, sorry, can we take the next one? This just gives you some idea in relation to ancestry. Bill mentioned about 12.5% of the Irish population, but when you look at the regional take there, you get some idea where, especially along the Atlantic provinces, and in Ontario, and one or two other places quite high. Sorry, the next one. Compare this to the Americans. The American ancestry, only about 9% of the United States population are actually of Irish descent, even though we hear so much about the American side. But how do these people emigrate, especially those involved in the Peter Robinson scheme? Sorry, can we take the next one? The problems in Ireland immediately after 1845 or 1815 were quite immense. You had an economic decline between 1793 and 1815. Irish agriculture bloomed on account of the fact the wars with France and the Napoleonic war. But in 1815, the wars came to an end. As a result of that, you have a major decline in agricultural prices. The price of grain between 1815 and 1816 declines between 40 and 60%. Another major issue that you have are the number of demobilised soldiers that are coming back. 1/3 of the British Army during the Napoleonic Wars were Irish. These were demobilised when the war ended in 1815. They come back and they create pressure on land. The next issue that you have is the famine of 1821 to 22, sometimes described 1823 because the knock-on effect still occurs in 1823. The main reason for it was the problem with the potato. The 1821, it rained and rained and rained. And as a result, the potato was a total wipeout. The next, the agrarian lawlessness, and I'll be talking about this because it is one of the factors which influence people to push for the Peter Robinson scheme to take place. And as Bill mentioned earlier, the whole issue of tides became a factor as well in the early 1820s. Famines were one thing that occurred throughout the 19th century. In a House of Commons report in 1901, if we can get the next one, there were 29 either famines, subsistence crisis, food problems between 1815 and 1901. Okay, we all know about the Great Famine, and the reason why it's called the Great Famine, many of you may have wondered, because there were so many famines in the 19th century that 1845 to 52 was the great one because it was the one which had the greatest impact in terms of death, mortality, etc. The other major one that we know quite a bit about is the Forgotten Famine of 1879 to 82. The reason why it's called the Forgotten Famine is politics was more important than the famine itself, because you have over 1 million people who are kept alive by private relief organisations. But the other famines, including that of 1821 to 23, are just as important in terms of the local impact that it actually had. In fact, William Carleton, the famous writer, stated, "No year in Irish history was without a famine." But each of the potato failures in these periods tended to be replaced by a bumper crop the following year. So as a result, people did not really think that there was going to be a major crisis the year after. While the distress of 1821, 22, 23 was severest in the west of Ireland, it also had a major impact on Munster. In July of 1822, sorry, can we get the next one? In July of 1822, it happened that William Colt, who was chairman of the Central Committee in Cork, wrote that there were reports that up to 92,800 people in the county were in great distress. By July, the figure had risen to 150,000. Now, one of the reasons why there was an attempt to stop the crisis in 1821-22 was you had the establishment of two very important relief organisations. One was the London Tavern Organisation, and the other one was the Mansion House Relief Committee, which has a major influence right up to the late 19th century. Involved in famines like the Great Famine, the one 1861-62, the Forgotten Famine, 1885-86. But one of the things that is very clear is the role which the British government, which Bill alluded to earlier, was the reaction of the government. Now, Bill was talking about during the Great Famine, but even before this, the British government was quite clear it would not provide help. And we see this here from William Gregory, the Under-Secretary of State in Ireland, in 1819. "I am adverse to the plan of sending potatoes to the south in the manner you propose, not from any doubt of the great partial distress, but from the principle that the government are not on all occasions to be the first resort when any pressure occurs, without the gentry contributing to the relief of the impoverished tenantry." And one of the problems was absentee landlords in particular provided no help whatever in the crisis of 1821 to 23. Periods of scarcity and famine led to increased levels of crime and lawlessness. And this is what happened in the North Blackwater region in this period. But it was not just a problem with food supply that led labourers and cottiers to resort to violence. The secret societies, which James Donnelly has highlighted so well in his book on secret societies, had started off in the late 18th century. But they gained momentum in the early 1820s, largely because of the crisis. Can we get the next one? If we move on to the next one, we've been there. But one of the major issues was localism, where the secret societies wanted the landlords, graziers, etc., to look after the individuals within their own locality. In fact, one that from North Cork, a warning that went out: "I do tell any strangers or Kerrymen or Limerick men to be off immediately." This localism can be seen as well in the barony of Clanwilliam, in Tipperary, that the landlords and graziers were told they could not send their food outside of the area for fear that it would lead to prices rising. It was largely against this background that and also the issue of tithes, which Bill mentioned as well, that you had this attempt by landlords in particular to try and come to a solution with regards to the issue of lawlessness. Because in the period, and can we take the next one, please? In the period from 1821 to 1824, there are 29 murders agrarian murders recorded in Tipperary, 28 in Limerick, 22 in Cork. Now, there's a certain question mark over some of these, on account of the fact that when you have a series of murders that take place, they tend to automatically be classified as agrarian murders, when very often it can be an family dispute that has actually taken place. But it was these agrarian crimes were put down to the level of unemployment and underemployment that was taking place at this stage. Maurice Fitzgerald, a local landowner, said, "I am convinced that employment was sufficiently extensive. The turbulent habits of the population would be altogether abandoned." If we can take the next. The landlords that were pushing for a solution to the question of agrarian crime included that individual we heard in Bill's talk there, Lord Kingston, Lord Mountcashel, and Viscount Errismore. And it was a period in which the British government had a number of assisted emigration schemes to British North America or Canada. There are 6 of them between 1815 and 1826. But the Peter Robinson scheme is the only scheme from Ireland. And it was pushed largely by these particular landlords, who had the ear of the Undersecretary for the Colonies, William Horton. William Horton was the major individual pushing the whole question of sending people to Canada. Why? There were 2 main reasons, as were alerted to by the ambassador earlier. Okay, the first one was after the 1812 American-Canadian War. Britain was very worried about its security. So many of those who leave, are former soldiers who had been demobilised under the schemes in Britain. But there was another factor, and the second factor was that if we can have the next slide, please. But the other factor was in relation to the strong French influence, which the British government wanted diluted. And we can see in terms of one of the main reasons that we're being pushed for the immigration scheme to take place from Ireland, with Lord Kingston to Lord Bathurst. I think you may well help us at very small expense to the government. If you will send out a few families to Canada and provision them for 1 year on land given them by the government, I could send you 30 industrious families in a short time, well calculated for settlers, and they would have many followers. If we take the next one, I think these are the schemes that actually were taking place, the 6 schemes. But it was largely because of the large-scale unemployment that had taken place in Britain immediately after the Napoleonic Wars. But one of the great fears that Britain had, and in Scotland in particular, they were sending out people to Canada, but they were being replaced by Irish paupers. One individual in Scotland maintained that in his area, while one Scottish family left for Canada, they were replaced by 2 pauper families from Ireland. So this was one of the reasons why, even in Britain, there was this demand that Irish people should be sent to Canada and not bring them into Britain. If we take the next one, I'm aware that we have only about 4 or 5 minutes left. But Peter Robinson also realised that that the gentry, the main thing that they wanted was to lower the level of crime in the area. And this was what Peter Robinson told William Horton. The gentry were unanimous of the opinion that I should take away as many persons as possible from the disturbed baronies in the county of Cork, which were at that time in a very disturbed state. Now, one of the people that was very supportive of the particular scheme was the Chief Secretary for Ireland at the time, Sir Robert Peel, the same Sir Robert Peel from the Great Famine period. And he was the one who largely set the parameters which were used by other assisted immigration schemes in the 19th century. That nobody could be over 45 years that was assisted, that families would go out, that the families could have not more than 3 children who were under 14 years of age. And it was Peter Robinson who was given the task. Okay, I'm aware in the afternoon we'll be hearing quite a lot in relation to Peter Robinson, so rather than be taking away the thunder of the other speakers, I'm going to skip that. But why was the scheme successful? Why did 500 people leave in June of 1923? It was largely because Peter Robinson did his homework. He went around the major areas in the North Munster area. He appointed an individual in each place to find out who would be suitable for to be sent. But the other one that were really important were the Catholic clergy. Now, overall in the 19th century, the Catholic clergy are very much opposed to immigration. But during times of famine and crisis, the Catholic clergy in parishes become very important in influencing the people to leave. We see it in Connemara, where Father John O'Sullivan encourages so many of the people there to actually emigrate to under the Lansdowne scheme. We can also see it Father Thomas Hoare, who was responsible for bringing nearly 1,000 people from Wexford and Wicklow to Iowa. Later on in the 1880s, the James Tuke scheme, which is so important in Mayo and Galway, it was the clergy who play a pivotal role. Why? On account of the fact parishioners are guided by what their clergymen tell them. In the Mitchelstown, Mallow area, the clergymen or priests actually read out the memorial that Peter Robinson had put up in relation to sending them to Canada. Why is it so successful? 500 leave in 1823. You have the 2,000 who leave then in 1825. Immigrants are the best agents for immigration. Those who leave in 1823, when Robinson actually brings them to Cork, there's only 360 of the group that he had selected. But as Bill was saying, the hangers-on that went along in the hope, they were selected and sent out then. But they are then sending back sort of letters and reports of the life that they're having, and it results in large numbers applying in 1825. And when the scheme comes to an end in 1825, because the British government reckoned that it was too expensive, there were 50,000 people who applied in Ireland to be sent out under any further scheme that the British government would put in place. But unfortunately, the British government decided they would never do that again, and they never did. This is what makes the Peter Robinson scheme so unique. It's unique on account of the fact that it is so successful. Your other schemes, like during the Great Famine, when you had John Robert Godley, who attempts to get the British government to send 100,000 Irish people to Canada, the Russell administration refuses. I'm realising I'm out of time, but there's one little point. One of the works that I'm very much engaged in and have been over the years have been the assisted immigration scheme of Tuke, the Tuke scheme from Mayo and Galway. But he sent the immigrants to 218 different destinations. 2 families from Mayo were sent to Peterborough. The people in Peterborough, the descendants from 1823 to 25, they built the houses for these new immigrants. They found them work. They helped them integrate into the community there. What it indicated was the Peter Robinson immigrants did not forget what had been done for them 50 years beforehand. And I'll leave it at that because my time is up.